The woman's hands told the story before she did. That was what Emmett Fairlow noticed first when she appeared at the edge of his property on a Tuesday morning in late October 1883. Not her face, not the bedroll tied across her back, not the fact that she was alone and on foot in the Nevada high desert with nothing but a canvas bag and a hat that had seen better decades. It was her hand, calloused across the palm in the particular way that comes from rope work and fence wire. The knuckle of her right index finger was bent at an angle that meant it had been broken and set badly, probably without a doctor. These were not the hands of a woman passing through. These were the hands of someone who had been doing hard work for a long time and expected to keep doing it. She stopped at the fence line, did not climb over it, did not call out, just stood there looking at the property the way a person looks at something they are trying to understand before they speak about it. The sheep in the near pasture had gone still, which was interesting. Sheep do not go still for strangers. They scatter or bunch, one or the other. They went still for her, the way animals go still for someone familiar. Emmett was 64 years old and had been running the Coppergate Ranch alone since his wife Miriam passed in the spring. Miriam had been the one who knew the sheep, all 40 of them by name, by temperament, by the particular way each one moved when something was wrong. When she died, Emmett had kept going the way a man keeps going, when stopping is not an option. But the truth, sitting at the bottom of his account book every evening, was the same truth it had been for 7 months. He was one man, and one man could not run 400 acres of high desert sheep station and a flock of 40 alone. Not at 64. Not anymore. He watched from the barn door. The woman at the fence was young, 25, maybe 28. Hard to tell out here where the sun and the wind did their arithmetic on a person's face regardless of age. She was lean in the way that means she was built for work, not in the way that means she hadn't eaten. Her coat was a man's coat too large. The sleeves rolled twice at the cuff. Her boots were good boots, though, well-oiled and properly laced, which told Emmett something. A person who takes care of their boots in conditions like this takes care of what matters. She had still not called out, had not waved or gestured, just waited, with the patience of someone who understood that showing up uninvited on a man's land required him to come to her in his own time. Emmett walked to the fence. She took off her hat when he was 10 yards out, and he saw her face clearly for the first time. Brown hair cut short, practical at the jaw, a straight-edged quality to her expression that was not hardness exactly, more like the face of someone who had learned to hold themselves very still when they were uncertain, which was different from being cold. "Sir," she said. Her voice was even. Western, not Southern. Colorado, maybe, or Utah. Emmett stopped at the fence. "You're on foot." "My horse went lame outside Elko. I left her at the livery. She'll mend." A pause. "I've been walking since yesterday morning." He looked at her. "You came from Elko on foot?" "I did. 31 miles of desert in late October." He looked at her boots again. The good ones. "What do you want?" he asked. She looked past him at the sheep in the near pasture, then at the barn. Then, with the methodical attention of someone taking inventory, at the fence line running south toward the ridge, where 2 posts were leaning at angles that meant the wire between them was losing tension. "Your south fence is going," she said. "You've got 2 posts pulling loose, and once the wire goes, you'll lose sheep to the ravine before morning." She looked back at him. "I know sheep. I know fence work, and I know grazing rotation, and I know what high desert does to a flock in winter." She held his gaze. "If you'll let me stay, I'll work your station. All I need is a place to sleep and 2 meals a day." Emmett looked at her for a long moment. "That's all?" he said. "That's all." Behind him, from the direction of the south pasture, came a sound that both of them heard at the same time. Not distress, not yet, but the low collective murmur of 40 sheep beginning to move toward something they shouldn't, the specific quality of a flock that has found a gap. The woman was already looking past him, reading the sound. "South fence," she said, not urgently, just as a statement of fact. Emmett looked at her for 1 more second. Then he opened the gate. She moved fast, but not in a way that spooked anything. She crossed the pasture at a diagonal, reading the flock's direction before she got there, and she did not run at them or wave her arms. She just positioned herself, quietly and without fanfare, between the sheep and the section of fence that was failing. She talked to them. Emmett could not hear what she said from where he stood, but he could see the flock shift, lose its forward momentum, slow, and then, inexplicably, in the way of a thing you had to see to believe, settle. He went to the barn for tools. By the time he came back with a post driver and wire, she had the flock moved to the east end of the pasture and was already examining the failing fence with her hands, testing the wire tension, checking where the post had lost its footing in the sandy soil. "Frost heave," she said without looking up. "It's been pulling loose since spring, maybe longer. The post needs to go deeper or you'll be back here every year." She looked at him. "You got another post?" "In the barn." She drove it herself. Emmett handed her things, and she did not make it into a production. She did not explain what she was doing or look to see if he was watching. She just worked with the focused, automatic efficiency of someone for whom this is not a skill but a habit. The post went in 18 inches deeper than the old one. The wire she retensioned by hand, testing it 3 times. The sheep had not moved from the east end of the pasture. When it was done, she walked the fence line south for another 200 yards, checking it by running her hand along the wire the way a doctor checks a pulse. She found one more weak post, marked it with a piece of cloth from her coat pocket, and came back. "You've got one more that'll go before February," she said. "That one can wait a week. The 2 you just fixed couldn't." Emmett looked at his fence. He looked at his sheep, still settled in the east corner. He looked at the woman, who had pulled a loose thread from her coat and was winding it around her finger, waiting. "What's your name?" he said. "Neva," she said. "Neva Crane." His hands went still for a moment. Then he said, "Come in for coffee." Her name was Neva Crane, and that was all Emmett knew about her for the first 3 weeks. She had come from somewhere east of Utah and was going nowhere in particular, and had stopped here because the work was visible and the need was obvious, and she had learned to read those things from a fence line away. That was what she told him. Everything else she left in the spaces between sentences, which were considerable. She slept in the room at the back of the barn. It had a cot and a stove and a window that faced the pasture. She had it clean inside a day. She was up before Emmett every morning and already working before he'd finished his coffee, which was either remarkable or unsettling depending on how you looked at it, and Emmett was not yet sure which. She knew the sheep. That was the first thing, and it remained the largest thing, because knowing sheep the way Neva knew them was not a common skill. She knew them individually, which ones were skittish, which ones were bold, which ewe had a tendency to crowd the water trough and needed to be watched in ice weather because she'd go in up to the knee and then panic. She knew the flock's rhythms the way a musician knows a piece of music, the variations that mean something and the ones that don't. Emmett watched her work and did not say what he was thinking, which was that she knew these things the way Miriam had known them. He did not let himself think about that for long. She was quiet at meals. Not uncomfortable, not hostile, just quiet the way certain people are quiet, the way that comes from spending long periods alone, or from learning that most things you might say are not worth the air they'd cost. She asked questions about the land. Where the water ran underground, which pastures iced first in hard weather, whether the north slope was good for summer grazing or went sparse by July. The questions of someone building a map inside themselves. Learning the land the way you learn a person, through accumulated detail, through what it shows you without meaning to. Emmett answered her. A little more, each evening. She never talked about where she'd come from, not with deflection, not with the sharp pivoting of someone hiding something criminal. More the way a person leaves a wound unbandaged in company, not from carelessness but from the knowledge that drawing attention to it doesn't help it close. There were 4 or 5 years in Neva Crane's biography between the girl she must have been and the woman she was now that she never mentioned. 4 or 5 years that had taught her to drive a fence post into frozen ground without being shown, and to know a sheep flock's mood from 100 yards and to walk 31 miles through the desert on boots she'd taken care of. One evening in mid-November, when the first serious cold had come down off the mountain, and the fire was working hard to keep the kitchen warm, Emmett set down his coffee and said, "Neva, where'd you learn the sheep?" She was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thoughtful. "My mother's family," she said, "Eastern Oregon. My grandfather ran 3,000 head of wool sheep on the high range." She turned her cup in her hands. "I grew up working it, from the time I was tall enough to be useful. And then I married a man who said he was going to buy land in Nevada." She said it simply, without drama. "He had a plan, and the plan was a good one, and for 2 years it was working." She looked at the fire, and then it wasn't. "He borrowed against the stock when the wool prices dropped. Thought the market would come back by spring." A pause. "It didn't. What happened to him?" "He left," she said. "April of 1881. Woke up one morning and was gone. Left me with the debt and a flock of 14 sheep and a property that wasn't going to be mine past summer." She looked at the fire for a long moment. "I sold what I could, paid what I could, walked away with what I could carry." "And the sheep?" Something moved across her face. "I kept 2 of them as long as I could," she said, "until I couldn't afford to feed them anymore." She stopped. "That was the worst day. Worse than the debt. Worse than him leaving." The fire moved in the grate. The wind pushed at the windows. "You've been working ranches since?" Emmett said. "3 of them. 2 in Utah, 1 outside Elko." "Elko didn't work out." She did not say how. "I'm sorry," Emmett said. She looked at him with the direct, clear-eyed attention of someone's unused to being offered sympathy. "Don't be," she said. "I learned something at every one of them." He believed that. That was the thing about Neva Crane. Everything she said had the quality of something she'd actually thought about, which was rarer than it should have been. He looked out the window at the pasture. Dark now, the sheep settled and invisible in the night. "Miriam named them all," he said. "It came out without planning. Every single one. Kept a list in the back of her Bible." He turned his cup. "I can't remember half of them now." She'd have been upset about that. Neva was quiet. She knew which ones were going to have trouble before they did, Emmett said. "I don't know how. She'd just look at a you funny for 2 days, and then she'd be right." He paused. "You do that too. I learned it from my grandmother," Neva said quietly. She must have been something. She was. The fire went on working and the wind went on pushing, and Emmett Fairlow looked at his hands and did not say all the things he was thinking. Which was all right. He was 64 years old. He knew that not everything needed saying to be understood. The trouble came on a Thursday in early December, in the form of 2 riders and a man in a good coat who arrived at the gate before sunup. Emmett knew the man in the coat. His name was Preston Daly, and he ran a land company out of Reno that specialized in the particular business of identifying ranches in difficulty and offering to purchase them at prices that were fair only if you were willing to ignore what the land was actually worth. He had sent a letter in September, 1 month after Miriam's funeral, which told Emmett everything he needed to know about how closely Preston Daly watched the obituary columns. Emmett had written back 2 words and not mailed them. Now Daly was at the gate before dawn with 2 men who wore their guns low and looked at the house with the flat professional attention of people employed to make other people feel less certain about their decisions. Emmett reached for his rifle. Neva was already at the barn door. She came out into the cold morning air without hurrying, her coat buttoned, her hat on, and she walked to the gate with the easy, straight-backed pace of someone who had decided on their approach before they started. She did not look at the 2 riders. She looked at Daly. "Help you," she said. Daly blinked. He had expected the old man. He adjusted. "I'm here to speak with Emmett Fairlow." "Mr. Fairlow doesn't take early morning meetings without prior arrangement." She rested a hand on the gate post. "Not blocking, just present. I manage operations here. You can speak with me." Daly looked her over with the assessing, slightly amused expression of a man who has underestimated people professionally for years and hasn't been wrong enough times to change the habit. "And who are you?" "Neva Crane. I've been running this station since October." She let that settle. "I have an offer for Mr. Fairlow," Daly said, producing a tone of patient generosity that was among the most precisely calculated things Emmett had ever heard in his life. "A fair one. This operation is under-resourced for its size. One man, his age, with a wool operation this scale. It's not sustainable. I'm offering him a real option before winter makes his situation worse." "Mr. Fairlow's situation," Neva said, "is his own business. I think he might appreciate an outside perspective." "I think," Neva said, "that you sent him a letter the week of his wife's funeral, which tells me everything I need to know about the quality of your perspective." She held Daly's gaze steadily, not angrily, just with the clear, direct certainty of a woman who has thought this through already. "The Copper Gate is not in difficulty. The Copper Gate is fully staffed and the flock is in good condition, and the operation is registered with the county. If you have a legitimate business interest, you can write a letter to our attorney in Elko." Daly's expression shifted in the small, specific way that expressions shift when a person realizes the conversation has not gone where they intended. "I don't think you understand the full picture," he said. "Then let me be clear about the part I understand." She looked at him with the eyes of someone who is not performing calm, but actually is calm, which is an entirely different thing and one of the harder things in the world to fake. "There are 3 of you. One of me at this gate. But there's a man inside that house who has been holding a letter you sent for 3 months and getting angrier about it every day. And if you push this morning, you're going to give him a reason to do something that all of us will regret." She did not look at the riders. "Do you want this land enough to make that kind of trouble before breakfast?" The 2 riders looked at each other. Daly looked at Neva for a long moment. Then he looked at the house, at the kitchen window where Emmett was visible, the rifle in the crook of his arm, the particular quality of stillness that belongs to a man who has made up his mind. "This conversation isn't over," Daly said. "Right to Elko," Neva said. He turned his horse. The 3 of them rode out onto the desert road, and the sound of their horses went away on the cold air. Neva stood at the gate until it was entirely quiet. Then she turned around. Emmett was on the porch. He lowered the rifle. He looked at her the way he had not looked at anyone in a long time, the way that meant something. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He went inside and came back a minute later with 2 cups of coffee and handed her one. They stood on the porch in the cold and drank it. That evening, Emmett opened the good whiskey, the one on the back of the shelf that had been Miriam's preference and that he had not touched since April. He poured 2 glasses and pushed one across the table before Neva could say she didn't need it. She looked at the glass. She looked at him. "You stood your ground," he said. "He was going to come back worse if I'd given him anything to work with. I know that." He turned his glass in his hands. "I've been knowing it for 3 months. But knowing it and being able to act on it are different things when you're 64 and alone and tired." He was quiet a moment. "He's been waiting for me to get tired enough to let go. That's his whole business." "Waiting. He'll write," Neva said. "He'll write," Emmett agreed. "Then we should find out if the Elko attorney handles land partnerships." Emmett looked at her. There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. "We," he said. She looked at the table. Something careful moved across her face, the look of a person approaching something important and wanting to be precise about it. "I lost everything I had once," she said, "not because anyone took it from me, because I trusted someone who didn't deserve it, and because I didn't know enough yet to protect what was mine." She turned her glass slowly. "I know more now." She looked up at him. "I don't want to watch this place go the way mine did, and I don't think you do either." The fire settled in the stove. The wind worked at the window. Emmett said, "Miriam would have liked you." Neva was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about her," she said. That was what opened it. Not a question about the ranch or the land or the finances. Just that one sentence. And Emmett talked about Miriam for an hour in the way he hadn't talked about her to anyone, because there hadn't been anyone to tell. He talked about the sheep she'd named, the list in the back of her Bible, the way she'd known which ewes were going to have trouble before they did, the particular laugh she'd had that was partly exasperation and partly delight, the way she'd planted the kitchen garden in a year when everyone told her the soil was too alkaline and proved them wrong by August. Neva listened. She didn't offer comfort or redirect the conversation or make it about something else. She just listened, with the full and genuine attention of someone who understood that listening was the thing required, not talking. When he was done, they sat in the comfortable quiet that follows a story well told. "I'll talk to the attorney," Emmett said finally, "about a formal arrangement, if that's something you'd want." Neva looked at him steadily. "What kind of arrangement?" "You'd be a partner, not a hired hand. 25% of the operation, with wages against the rest. If you're still here in 2 years and it's working." He paused. "I don't have children. I've got a nephew in San Francisco who'd sell this land to the first buyer he could find." He looked at the table. "I don't want that. I want someone here who'll take care of what Miriam and I built." He looked at her. "I think you might be that person. I don't know yet, but I think it." She was quiet for a long time. "Why?" she said, not suspicious, genuinely asking. "Because you fixed my fence before I invited you in," he said. "Because you knew which sheep were going to bunch before they did. Because you stood at that gate this morning and you weren't afraid, and you didn't do anything that would have made things worse." He paused. "And because when I talked about Miriam, you listened like it mattered." Neva looked at the fire. Her eyes were bright. She didn't look away or try to compose herself into something more collected. She just let it be there, which Emmett thought was among the more honest things he'd seen a person do. "I'll earn it," she said. "I know you will," he said. "That's the only reason I asked." Daly wrote in January. The letter was 3 pages and cited 2 county records and suggested politely that the Copper Gates financial situation would benefit from professional evaluation. Neva wrote back on behalf of the operation in 4 sentences and included the name of the Elko attorney, who had by then registered the partnership agreement with the county clerk. Daly did not write again. The winter was hard in the particular way Nevada winters are hard, which is not the dramatic cold of the mountains, but the grinding, patient cold of the high desert that gets into the gaps and stays there. 2 weeks of it cracked the water pipe from the well to the barn. Neva and Emmett repaired it together in temperatures that made the tools sting through work gloves, and neither of them said much while they did it, because there was nothing to say. The work was the thing. You did it. The flock came through the winter without losses. 40 sheep, 40 still in March, when the first warm days came and the pasture began to show green under the last of the frost. Emmett walked the south pasture on the first warm morning and counted them. He'd never made it to 40 before without losing at least 1 to the cold, not since Miriam. He didn't say anything about that. He didn't have to. In April, Neva received a letter. Emmett saw it on the table when he came in for supper, and he saw the handwriting, which was careful and deliberate, and he saw the return address, which was a town in eastern Oregon he didn't know. He did not ask about it. 3 evenings later, she told him. "My grandmother," she said. "She's not well. I'm sorry." She turned the letter in her hands. "She wants me to come." Emmett nodded. "Then you should go." She looked up at him. There was something in her expression he hadn't seen before. Something uncertain. "It's a long way," she said, "and the spring shearing is in 6 weeks. I'll manage the shearing. I've done it before. You can't run 40 head through shearing alone. I'll hire day labor for the week." She looked at the letter. "I don't know how long she'll need me." "Neva." He waited until she looked at him. "This ranch will be here. What you've built here is yours. It'll be here when you come back." He held her gaze. "Go see your grandmother." She was quiet for a moment. When she looked up, she was composed in the way that means something has been decided. "I'll be back before summer grazing," she said. "I'll have the north pasture ready." The night before she left, she walked the fence line again. All of it, the whole 400 acres, in the long April evening light. Emmett watched her from the barn door for a while and then went back to his work, because some things are private, and a person is entitled to them. She came back at dusk. She sat down on the fence rail near the barn and looked at the pasture for a long time, at the sheep moving through the last light, at the fence line straight and solid in every direction, at the water trough rebuilt over winter with new stone and mortar that would hold through freeze and thaw for the next 30 years. Emmett came and leaned on the fence beside her. "Miriam's list," she said. "The sheep, the names in the Bible, I've still got it." "I've been using the names," Neva said. "I didn't tell you. I looked at the list and I started using them because it seemed wrong not to." Emmett was quiet for a moment. "Which ones did you figure out?" "Most of them. There's a 3-year-old ewe who bosses the water trough that I'm pretty sure is Josephine." He almost smiled. "That's Josephine. And the old one with the gray ear that always stays at the back of the flock. That's Ruth." Neva nodded. She looked at the pasture. "She built something worth keeping," she said. "She did, so did you." He looked out at the land in the last of the light. 400 acres that he and Miriam had built from a deed and a hope, and 30 years of showing up every morning regardless. The flock moving through the dusk, the fence line holding. "So did you," he said, "in the time you've been here." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Below them, the sheep grazed in the long April evening, and somewhere out on the east fence line, a coyote called once and went quiet, and the Nevada high desert held the last of the light as long as it could before letting it go. She left in the morning. She came back in July, thinner, quieter, with a small crate in the back of the wagon that she carried into the barn herself. Emmett heard something in it that took him a moment to identify. Then he recognized it. 2 sheep, small and young, barely past lambing. She'd brought them from Oregon. He didn't ask. She would tell him when she was ready. That evening at supper, she said, "They were my grandmother's, her favorites. She wanted them to go somewhere they'd be taken care of." She looked at the table. "She died 3 weeks ago." "I'm sorry, Neva." She nodded. She was ready. She'd had a good long life. She was quiet a moment. "She told me." She stopped, started again. "She told me that the hardest thing for a woman like me was to let myself stay somewhere. That I'd spent so long moving that I'd stopped trusting what it felt like to stop." The fire in the stove made its small sounds. The summer dark was out beyond the window. "She was right," Neva said. Emmett did not say anything. He understood that sometimes you let a person arrive at the place they've been moving toward, and the best thing you can do is be there when they get there. "I want to put them in the south pasture," she said, "with the rest of the flock. That's where they belong," he said. She went out that evening after supper and stood at the south pasture fence, while the 2 small sheep from Oregon found their footing in the new grass, and the larger flock moved around them with the quiet collective acceptance that animals extend to what belongs. Emmett watched from the porch and then went inside, because again, some things are private. He could hear her out there for a while, talking to the sheep the way she always did, in the low, even voice that had no particular words that he could make out from this distance, just the sound of someone saying what needed to be said to a creature that was listening. After a while, it went quiet. When she came in, she poured herself the last of the coffee and sat down at the table with the ease of someone who has stopped calculating whether they belong somewhere and just belongs there. "The north fence needs attention before fall," she said. "I know," Emmett said. "I was going to ask you to walk it with me tomorrow." "Early," she said. "Before the heat." Before the heat. She finished her coffee. Outside, the flock was settling into the summer dark, and somewhere in the south pasture, 2 sheep from eastern Oregon were learning the particular geography of a place that was going to be their home for the rest of their lives, which was not something any animal needs to be told. They figure it out. They settle in. They stop looking toward the road. Some things you don't always know the moment they begin. You look back one day and the drifting has simply ended the way a river ends, not in a moment but in the slow widening into somewhere it always meant to arrive.